Hello there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Changing Minds podcast. It's me, Owen Fitzpatrick, and I'm delighted for you to be joining me today because I'm going to be talking about something that I think will be extremely valuable and useful, which is, once again, the language of persuasion. Now, we've done another episode on the language of persuasion where we were more focusing on how to convince people that have a certain point of view to believe a different point of view. Today, we're going to be looking at the language of sort of sales and relationships, some of the most important wording that you can use to be even more effective, not only at being able to build better relationships, but also motivating people more effectively. Overall, being more skilled at being able to use words to make changes. Now, this is obviously something that has been very much a part of my life for quite a while. I, of course, early on in my career was spending an awful lot of time looking at the language that I was using. I studied NLP, neurolinguistic programming. In fact, I've written a number of books, co-written a number of books on this subject with the wonderful Dr. Richard Bandler, the creative genius, one of the co-founders of NLP. And indeed, some of the ideas or some of the insights that we talked about in the last session were very much influenced by people like Dr. Richard Bandler, as well as some other great NLP trainers out there. For me, this particular episode today really looks at how you can be as effective in the everyday conversations. And I'm going to draw from, let's say, 3 different places to share some of the most unique and most informative insights out there in the space of relationship and sales language. One of those spaces is from NLP again, in the form of what we call modal operators. And I'll talk about what modal operators are, but effectively they're to do with motivation. And they can also be to do with what's possible. There's what we call modal operators of possibility and modal operators of necessity. And we're going to talk about both, and we're going to look at how they might be useful. Then we're going to look at what are known as magic words by a great book recently by the author Jonah Berger. Jonah Berger, of course, is the author of a number of great books like Catalyst and Whatnot Contagious. And Berger really looks at, that's a great name, isn't it, Berger? Every time I say his name, I salivate. Every time I read his books, I salivate. That's Pavlov's dog. Doesn't it? Pavlov ring a bell? Sorry, it's an old joke. But yes, Berger is his second name. Great name. Not spelled B-U-R-G-E-R, spelled B-E-R-G-E-R. But still, it really makes me hungry. I'll get over that, though, to explain that his book, Magic Words, excellent book, looks at a lot of the research out there in terms of words. I'm not going to go through all of it. I might do the work of series. Maybe that might come back soon. Would you like that? Let me know on social media. Let me know that you want more of that. Like, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram and all that. Let me know if you want that. And also, if you haven't already, sign up to my newsletter, owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter. It's like long form articles that hopefully help you to change the way you think. It's called Inner Propaganda. Definitely recommend you do that. But anyway, back to burgers and chips, as we call them, or fries, as they said in the States. The other thing that we're going to be looking at is Gottman, John Gottman. John and Julie Gottman did a lot of research in the space of relationships and of a hugely successful ability to predict which relationships will last, which relationships will be successful. So we're going to be looking at the work of John and Julie Gottman as well. So those are the 3 areas we're going to focus on now. To be fair, there's lots of other places we could go. If we're talking sales, there's Phil M. Jones, Exactly What to Say, wonderful stuff, and definitely want to do something on Phil's work because I think it's terrific in its application. It really is terrific. The book itself is excellent and very practical. Exactly What to Say is the book, and it's Phil M. Jones. If you're looking for more information there, I've met Phil, and he's super. There's also lots of other great work around language. We may well do one on the language of transformation down the line as well. Again, depending on what's of interest, see how many people check this one out. But with this one, we're going to be starting by looking at modal operators. So what is a modal operator? In a nutshell, we're looking at words like, whenever we say things like I can, I could, I would, I would like to. All of those are examples of what we call modal operators. And there's modal operators of possibility, which are those ones, or modal operators of necessity. I need to, I have to, I must do. And a really good way of understanding it is that when you're trying to motivate yourself, it's a good idea for you to do a sort of an inventory for you to go through what do you say to yourself when you actually get off the couch and do the action? What is it that you need to say to yourself to get the results? And so for some people, it might be, I can do it. As soon as they tell themselves, I can do it, that's what gets them to take the action. Other people, they need to say, I need to, I have to, I must. Some people need to say, I will, I'm going to. So a good way to demonstrate this is think about something that you want to be motivated to do, right? And replace the word X or the letter X with that. And I want you to try on these sentences. So I'm going to say each sentence out. I want you to try it on in your mind. So we'll start with, I'd like to do X. And just notice how that sits in you. Notice, how do you feel about that action when you say it that way? Now change it and say, I can do X. So I'd like to do X. I can do X. Now change it and say, I could do X. And again, notice how that feels. Change it and say, I want to do X. I want to do X. Change it and say, I have to do X. I have to do X. Change it and say, I need to do X. I need to do X. Change it and say, I must do X. I must do X. Then change it and say, I will do X. I will do X. Next, try, I'm going to do X. I'm going to do X. And finally say, I'm doing X. I'm doing X. Now, for some people, you might think, oh, you're going progressively into more and more likely to happen. But that's not necessarily true. Some people, whenever they say, I can, that makes them significantly more motivated than I need to or I have to, which makes them feel this way. I didn't also say, I should do X. And the reason I sort of left that one out is oftentimes when we say, I should do X, that invariably for most people is not something that works well. Now, it does work for some people. So it's important for us to recognize if that's the kind of word that works well for us. And this whole area sort of explores and looks at the fact that we can motivate ourselves in different ways by paying attention to the words that we use to ourselves. Now, we can also notice what words tend to work with others as well. These words were also mentioned by Jonah Berger, which we'll get into in a moment. When he was talking about magic words, one of the phrases he described was, or one of the language pieces he described rather, was when he talked about moving from should to could, and said a lot of times when we say we should do something, I should stay on this diet, by changing that and saying I could stay in the diet, it makes most people feel more empowered, which is not a million miles away from really what we've just been talking about with modal operators. He also said, instead of saying I can't do something, like I can't go off this or I can't make that mistake, it's like I won't make that mistake. Or instead of from can't, don't. So I can't do this. I don't do that. These are small little phrases. What he suggests is by doing it that way, it allows you to be and feel more empowered. Personally, I think it's even more valuable for us to pay attention to what we say to ourselves when we're trying to motivate ourselves, because while that might work for a lot of people, the truth is that we're all subjective human beings with different interpretations of words and different feelings that come to us based upon the language we use to ourselves. So it's important for us to recognize what modal operators, what motivating words we could use, and to use them on purpose to drive us forward and to figure out what works. The second category, as we said, are going to come from some of the research done by Berger and his colleagues. I love saying that word, Berger. Sorry. And we'll start off with the identity labels. Now, this is almost diametrically opposed to the notion of growth mindset. With growth mindset, the game is that you're trying not to position someone as having an identity. So you don't say, oh, you're so creative, you're this, you're that, you're the other, because you want them to focus attention on the effort they've put in to be creative. So I love how much effort you put in. I love how hard you're working at this. That's how we need to congratulate people or reinforce the kind of behavior that we want to see in them. And I think from that perspective, it's useful. The way in which Jonah talks about it is that if you want to motivate people to do something, to take action, the research shows that if you say, would you help me by washing the dishes? That's not as powerful as saying, will you help me by being a dishwasher, right? Or I'm hoping that you're going to vote, or will you be a voter? So it's giving them the label of the actual thing makes people more likely. The research shows that people are significantly more likely to do the thing if they're given the label for it. So in other words, think through what is the behavior you want to see, what is the identity of that behavior, and then when you're proposing it to them, then how can you propose it in such a way that by taking the action, they can actually become that? So it's the difference between I run versus I'm a runner. When you're a runner, naturally people will think of you as more likely to be someone who runs regularly and runs more than someone just who runs. So it's, again, what label that you can give to your identity is what matters there, or someone else's identity for that matter. And once again, we have to see the nuance with the growth mindset. Growth mindset is much more about letting people realize the capacity they have for growth. Whereas in this case, you're trying to motivate people to take a new action and a consistent action. And we know that people who believe that they are a certain type of person tend to engage in that kind of behavior on a more consistent basis. A lot of research out there. I've been teaching that for many, many years from an NLP perspective. And people like James Clear in Atomic Habits has reinforced that through his great book. Something else that's important is words like you is what we call a relevancy trigger. It grabs people's attention, but sometimes if you're talking about problems, for example, people can find it very easy to feel blamed if you use the phrase you. I is good for ownership, but it can again be sort of quite self-absorbed when we use I. So you is great for grabbing attention, but can sometimes put people on the defensive. I is great for taking ownership. Can sometimes make it seem like you're being too selfish, for example. So we have to be aware of when and how we use pronouns in that context. To engage people, to interest people, the three things that make the most difference, again, what Jonah suggests with the research is, first of all, making sure that you're using emotive language, so language strong in emotion. Second of all, you want to make sure you're using familiar language, language that they've heard before and they're used to. And third, concrete language, language about actual things as opposed to abstract ideals. And when you use emotional, familiar, and concrete language, you're much more likely to get emails open, to get people to be reading, to keep them reading, to get them to pay attention to what it is that you say. And so great speakers, when they, for example, great storytellers and speakers, when they tell a story, they use a lot of concrete language. They use a lot of familiar language. They use a lot of emotion, and there's ups and downs and journeys throughout the entire story for the listeners to experience and whatnot. So once again, how can you be more emotional? How can you use more familiar and more concrete language in the way in which you communicate to guarantee that you're going to grab people's attention and keep their attention? There's also things like asking questions. Jonah says in terms of, again, a lot of the research done, that when you ask people for advice, that actually makes you come across as more intelligent, which is sort of counterintuitive to some degree, because you think, oh, I don't want to look stupid, but actually it makes you come across quite smart, probably because, as he explains, you look smart for knowing how valuable their insights are. Therefore, they think, oh, this person knows that I'm the right person to ask questions of. So flattery brings you everywhere, does everything for you. There's also the follow-up questions as well. And he suggests that when you ask follow-up questions, you really build likability and you make people feel more likely to trust you and more likely to feel listened to, because you're demonstrating real curiosity, real interest in what they have to say. And the other bit of research that Berger talked about in his book, and he did a lot of other things, definitely recommend getting your hands on the book, Magic Words, but he talked about the importance of confident language and certain language. And he says, you want to move from hedges to, hedges would be, I sort of think, maybe, possibly, to definites. I definitely believe, I'm absolutely certain, this is surely the way to go. And he says, when you start to use more of that definite language, you're going to be more confident, therefore more persuasive. Now, he also says it's important to recognize when you're not 100% sure, and certainly a lot of experts, because they want to be more accurate than they want to appear confident, they're going to be hedging their bets more, because sometimes things aren't black and white. But if you want to be more persuasive and you want to be demonstrate more confidence, then using more definite language will work. Cutting fillers will definitely help. And speaking more in the present tense as opposed to the past tense. The present tense is more about this is happening as opposed to this did happen. Or speaking about something that you did find. I found this was pretty good. I find that this is pretty good. Demonstrates a lot more certainty a lot more strength in that way as well. And also he mentions, the whole you thing, the pronoun, that when you speak to yourself, if you want to be able to give yourself like a pep talk or whatnot, or feedback, use the you as opposed to I. So say, you can do this, Owen, I believe in you. And when you speak to yourself in that sort of second person, really, it allows you to be able to have more distance from the challenge or the problem that you're going through at the moment. So that's, again, another cool thing that came from. Excellent book, definitely recommended. I might even do the workup series on that, as I mentioned, at a later point. Gottman, John and Julie Gottman, did a lot of research studies where they were able to predict with ridiculous amount, more than 90% certainty, whether or not a couple would still be around 5 years later, based upon just some short amount of time with the couple. And they found what they call the 4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse, things like contempt and things like criticism and whatnot, stonewalling, those kind of things. But they also looked at some of the most important ways of communicating that couples need to practice when they're speaking to each other. And I want to walk you through some of these ones. So you've got things like appreciating them. So I really appreciate you. I appreciate what you did. I appreciate who you are. Giving people appreciation is something that will deepen, improve a relationship. Validating their feelings, making them feel okay. And I totally understand why you would feel that way. It's completely understandable why you immediately started to feel like that. So validating their feelings is important. When you're starting up a conversation, let's say you're about to start up an argument, you start it up gently. You find a way to be able to recognize and softly bring up whatever it is that you want to bring up in that moment. And you're very careful in the way that you do that. When you're asking questions, again, back to what Berger found, you're asking questions, you're following it up. So you're demonstrating curiosity. You're demonstrating that you're interested in what they have to say. And when you are arguing, you take a responsibility for your part in the responsibility. Again, by using language around this, by using language that starts things up softly, by using language like questions that follow up and show that you're interested, by using language that takes responsibility, by using language that validates their feelings or appreciates them, you're really building a deeper bond, a deeper relationship. You also want to demonstrate that you understand their point of view. You want to demonstrate empathy. So I'm getting the sense that this is true for you, or this is how I'm feeling, you're feeling, am I right? So you don't just predict what they're feeling or guess what they're feeling. You do that as you ask them the question, am I right? Am I accurate? Am I on the right track? Would love to know a bit more. So that you're showing that whether or not you've gotten it right or not, you really do want to know how they're feeling. And when they try to make an effort, you acknowledge the effort, even if it's not what you wanted. It's really important to make sure that people, what they call bids, and this is what Gottman sort of call it when someone's making an effort. When someone tries to do that, it's really important that we acknowledge their effort. We sort of see them doing it and acknowledge and say, look, I see how hard you're trying. I really do. Again, back to the appreciation piece. And then we are able to offer support to them in that way so that they can feel that we are doing our very, very best to have their back and to take their side. Now, at the same time, we also have to be able to ask for what we need. We have to be able to do those boundaries and to be able to know what is important to us and also to learn what's important to them so we can recognize that. We need to demonstrate admiration, demonstrate gratitude so that they can feel that we are very grateful and feel immensely thankful that we have them in our lives, because oftentimes we don't really experience that enough. We don't hear people sharing how grateful they feel that we are in their lives. And it's really important that we do that to the best of our ability. And then the other thing is something that you might have heard in terms of whenever anyone goes to couples therapy, it's whenever you're talking about an issue that you want to share with another person, about a problem that's come up that you want to discuss and you might even argue about, try to put in the terms of what you feel. So it's like, I feel when this happens, this is how I feel, as opposed to you did this, you made me feel this. Instead, whenever this happens, this is how I feel. And by bringing everything down to that, you're really taking ownership and responsibility for what's going on. And you're opening up a conversation to steer it towards potentially being able to figure it out, to have a conversation with them where the two of you can go back and forth and figure out how to overcome some of the challenges that you have, some of the problems or issues that have cropped up. So, and just to summarize what we've looked at, and once again, we could talk about this for days, right? I could talk to you about language for many days. But I wanted to give you some immediately useful ideas just in this episode that might help you improve the quality of the relationships you have with those in your life, as well as even the relationships you have with key stakeholders, if you will, in the business. And so the first thing we talked about is motivation and motivating words, what we call modal operators in NLP, neurolinguistic programming. And being aware of how we talk to ourselves, like I can, I could, I will, I would, I need to, I have to, I must do, I should do, I'm going to do, I will do, and seeing which one works for you. And then when you're communicating with others, how do the different words impact other people when you're looking at opening up more possibilities in the way in which you use that kind of language? Then we talked about Jonah Berger, and we looked at some of the things that Jonah did with the latest book that he's written called Magic Words. And in it, he talks about, the identity language and whatnot, and the importance of using that when you're trying to motivate people to take action, the you and I and the positives and negatives of both words, being able to engage people more effectively by grabbing their attention by using emotional language, familiar language, and concrete language, words that of real things that you can actually touch and see and hear and feel, for example. We talked about building better relationships by asking advice from people and by using follow-up questions to show your interest, and also confident language, where you move from hedges to definite language. You put fillers from your language and you move more from the past tense to the present tense. And also he mentioned about using you when you're talking to yourself and trying to give yourself a motivational pep talk. And then finally, we talked about the Gottmans and the great work and research there about things like appreciating another person's feelings, appreciating them, appreciating their behaviors, what they've done, the great qualities they have. We talked about validating their feelings, using follow-up questions with them, starting conversations gently, all the things to do with gratitude and offering support. And a lot of things that initially we kind of intuitively know, but the real beauty of this is that there's a sentence for everything that we're talking. There's a way to demonstrate gratitude. I feel really grateful for X. There's a way to admire. One of the things I really love about you is X. Asking for what you need. This is really important to me. Very straightforward. Offering support. Is there any way I can help you? Taking responsibility. Look, I know I played a part in this and I apologize for it. Like, all of these have sentences attached. So what I'd ask you to do is think through all of these different examples and think through the various different sentences that you can use to be able to start to incorporate these magic words, these relationship words, these motivating words into your everyday conversation. Hope you found that useful. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you will share it with everyone and tell everybody and let people know that we are learning some great things on the Changing Minds podcast. It's wonderful altogether. But for now, take it easy, be well. May the force, as always, continue to be with you. May you believe better. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, rest of your week, rest of the month, and so on and so forth. Bye for now.